He that shall be covered with a great cloak shall be induced to commit some great act. The 12 red ones shall soil the tablecloth. Under murder, murder shall be committed.
The 12 red ones. We know that Pope John Paul dined with cardinals on the night of his death. But according to Nostradamus, John Paul I is not the only modern-day pope to have a short reign. In another quatrain, he suggests that other future popes will reign only for short periods.
After the sea has been held 17 years, 5 shall change within the same period of time.
The suggestion here is quite simple and straightforward. It means that during a period of 17 years, we will have 5 different popes. But when will this occur? Well, history shows us that since the time of Nostradamus, we haven't had 5 popes in 17 years, so we must look to recent times to see if they fulfill the conditions. Pius XII reigned for 19 years. Perhaps he is a starting point, even though his reign was 2 years longer than Nostradamus stipulated. Of course, it must in all fairness be pointed out that to be 2 years out after 400 years seems a reasonable error. However, as Pius XII was succeeded by John XXIII for 5 years and Paul VI for 15 years, this cannot be right, because the reigns of these 2 popes alone totals 20 years. So our pope of 17 years cannot be Pius XII. But perhaps it could be Paul VI. His reign was 15 years, again an error of 2, as pointed out before. But before we investigate this, we must first turn to another prophet who lived before Nostradamus and who wrote exclusively about the popes. His name was Malachi.
Saint Malachi, an Irish bishop of the 12th century, devoted his visionary powers to the future of the Roman popes. He predicted 112 popes from the year 1143, using symbolic and characteristic titles to describe each pope. According to St. Malachi, our present Pope, John Paul II, is Pope number 110. Pope 111 is described as Olive's Glory, and Pope number 112, Peter the Roman, the last of St. Malachi's popes. He writes, "During the last persecution of the Holy Roman Church will reign Peter the Roman, who will tend his sheep amidst numerous tribulations. These having passed, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the stern judge will judge his people."
Now we have a chance to look into the future of the Catholic Church and Rome. Knowing that St. Malachi has said there will be 112 popes, and John Paul II is number 110, then in his theory, there are to be only 2 more popes of Rome. The last to be called Peter, and the other, we're not sure. Now let's see how this compares to Nostradamus. He says not that the popes will end, but that they will have to leave Rome because Rome is devastated, and he gives us a hint of the time when this will occur. If the pope who reigns for 17 years was Paul VI, then he will be followed by 5 more within the same period. 1, John Paul I, 3 weeks. 2, John Paul II. 3, 4, St. Malachi's last Pope of Rome, Peter. 5, another Pope, but not in Rome, and that Pope will be elected within 17 years from 1978. That is, by the year 1995. I quote Century 3, Quatrain 84. "The great city will soon be quite deserted. Not a single one of the inhabitants will remain. Wall 6, church and the Virgin ravished." And in Century 2, Quatrain 41, he writes, "The cloud will make the sun appear double." Witnesses to an atomic explosion have described the blast as appearing like a second sun. "The large mastiff, the dogs of war, will howl all night when the great pontiff changes his abode." These 2 quatrains clearly describe the destruction of Rome, probably by a nuclear blast. And if we refer to the figures acquired earlier, it seems safe to assume that sometime before the year 1995, the Pope will have to leave Rome because the great city is devastated by an atomic bomb.
A new law will occupy a new land around Syria, Judea, and Palestine.
Here, Nostradamus is referring to the creation of the Israeli state. But he goes much further than that.
The great barbarian empire will crumble before the century of the sun is finished.
Israel will be victors in this long-running war, and it will be finished by the end of the century of the sun, the name given to the 20th century.
No more wars, peace, real peace, and forever.
Another striking quatrain relevant to our times.
Rain, famine, war in Persia having not ceased, too great a faith shall betray the monarch. Being ended there, it shall commence in France, a secret omen to one that he shall die.
This is a startling prediction, giving outstanding detail of the war in Persia, the ancient name for Iran. But let us examine it carefully.
Too great a faith shall betray the monarch. It shall commence in France.
Until recently, the majority of people did not know who the Ayatollah was, let alone that he would launch his coup from Paris. Yet Nostradamus, 400 years before, predicted it. Within weeks of leaving Paris, the Ayatollah had completed a total political and cultural revolution in Iran.
All too much? Let's pause a moment. This is the year 1979, and we've just examined 400 years of history in the light of the prophecies of Nostradamus. Now, we're dealing with the present and the future, which brings us to what, for us, is the essence of the mystery. How accurate is he? Can we dismiss this as just another fad, or is there some credibility? If we believe what he said about our past, then there's a fair chance that what he said about our future is true also. And if that's the case, then we must listen very carefully. For Nostradamus, as he said, provides us with a warning. He does give us this hope. We can change our destiny, but we must heed the warning and act accordingly. For if we ignore it, we may not be around to remember how accurate he was. So now, the future. What does Nostradamus tell us will happen? Essentially, the prediction is war. A third world war that will be nuclear and far worse than all other wars put together.
One that shall cause the infernal gods of Hannibal to live again, the terror of mankind. Never more horror, nor the papers tell of worse in the past. And in the last era, all the kingdoms of Christianity, and also all unbelievers, shall quake for the space of years, and there shall be more grievous wars and battles. Towns, cities, castles, and other buildings shall be burnt, desolated, and destroyed. Married women and widows ravished, sucking children dashed against the walls of towns, and so many evils shall be committed by the means of that infernal prince, Satan, that almost the entire world shall be undone and desolate.
So Nostradamus predicts a third world war. What's so startling about that, you say? People have been predicting a third world war ever since the second one finished. All right. But Nostradamus, who wrote this 400 years ago, also gives us the year and the signs to look for. He tells us who will be fighting and why, and suggests there will be occurrences of unprecedented natural disasters, such as floods, famine, and earthquakes, and tells us exactly when and where these events will take place. He assembles a powerful jigsaw puzzle, the eventual pattern of which cannot be denied. So let's take the pieces of that puzzle one by one. I might warn you that from now on the subject matter will not be very comfortable, but as the thinking creations of this universe, perhaps we have an obligation to protect it and consider any warnings to that end. Remember, these warnings are not the opinions of the producers of this program, but interpretations of Nostradamus, based on facts available today. If we are to have a war, we must ask ourselves 5 questions. When? Where? Who will be fighting? How long will it last? And who will survive? First, we ask when. And although there are several hints left by Nostradamus, there are 2 which are quite clear and must be considered side by side. One, it could be as early as 1981, and the other stating quite clearly that the war will be well underway by 1999.
In the year 1999 and 7 months, from the sky will come the great king of terror. He will bring back to life the great king of the Mongols. Before and after, war reigns happily.
Our second quatrain is unanimously understood as an Arab invasion of Europe, and the date, although obscure, can be determined by means of astrology.
The king enters Europe wearing a blue turban. He will reign for less than a revolution of Saturn. The king with a white turban, his heart banished to Byzantium, Sun, Mars, and Mercury near Aquarius.
These regular conjunctions can be predicted, and they do occur very regularly, but they don't occur frequently. The Sun, Mars, Mercury, and Aquarius will be together in 1981 in February. Actually, on the 4th of February, the moon will be passing in front of the sun. We'll get an eclipse of the sun.
So we have a time. It could be as early as 1981, and in the specific words of Nostradamus, it's already underway by 1999. That one quatrain suggests that it will be less than 29 years in duration, and also gives a hint of who will be fighting. To have a war, you must have aggression. Where will it come from? Russia? China? The West? In quatrain after quatrain, Nostradamus indicates that the trouble will come from the Middle East, specifically Iran, or, as it was called in his day, Persia.
By fire and sword, not far from the Black Sea, they shall come from Persia to seize upon Trebizond. The kingdoms of the church will be overcome by the sea. Towards Persia, very near 1 million. Help provided too late, Persia will turn and invade Macedonia. France by neglect shall be assaulted by 5 sides. Tunis and Algiers shall be stirred by the Persians.
There are too many references to ignore the suggestion that the Middle East will play a central role in the trouble to come. And yet, is this a realistic possibility? After all, Nostradamus was talking about a time which may be only 2 years away. Could Persia, or Iran as we know it, cause a 3rd World War? To answer this, let's turn to what we know of Iran today and the revival of Islam throughout the world.
Founded in the 7th century, the Islam faith is the world's youngest universal religion. With an estimated 750 million followers, the faith has become the 2nd largest and is fast catching up to Christianity. This past decade has seen a sudden and somewhat unexpected resurgence of Islam. Muslims throughout the world are rediscovering their spiritual roots and reasserting the political power of the Islamic way of life. The Islamic moral code is regarded by many Westerners as a relic of the Stone Age with harsh criminal provisions. For example, an habitual thief is punished by having his hand cut off. A person caught drinking alcohol receives 80 lashes. An adulterer is either scourged or stoned to death. World attention is now focused on the Islamic countries. They form what's been dubbed a crescent of crisis. Now that crescent straddles the crossroads of 3 continents, stretching in an arc from southern Africa through the Middle East to Southeast Asia. More than 20 countries in this region are exclusively Islamic, Muslims make up between 50 and 90% of the populations of another 8 countries, and in varying degrees up to 50% in yet a further 35 countries. Interestingly, the Soviet Union, with 50 million Muslims, has the world's 5th largest Islamic population after India, Indonesia, Pakistan and Bangladesh. Communist China also has a large Muslim community in its southern region, estimated at just under 18 million people. The Crescent of Crisis, as the name implies, contains most of the world's trouble spots. It also contains most of the world's known oil deposits, a vital factor with the energy problems now being felt by most industrialized nations, both communist and non-communist. It's the importance of this factor that's given added impetus to the Islamic revival. The realization by Muslims that the major powers have become increasingly dependent on them for their very existence. The world's Muslims believe that they and their countries have been both economically and culturally suppressed by the superpowers, but that now, because of the world oil situation, they're finally able to reassert themselves. The question that still remains is how the superpowers will react to this continuing development of the Islamic faith.
Out of the country of Greater Arabia shall be born a strong master of Mohammedan law, who shall vex Spain and conquer Granada, and by sea shall come to the Italian nation.
Nations could pose a major threat politically and economically to world peace. They have the objective, they have the numbers. But do they have the technology to wage a nuclear war?
We're fairly confident that none of the Muslim countries as yet possess any nuclear weapons.
Dr. Donald Brennan, director of the Hudson Institute in New York, is advisor to the American government on international power play and nuclear armaments.
The major threat that we're concerned with in security planning for the United States is and will remain for a long while to come the Soviet Union. The Soviets could undoubtedly inflame crises in many areas of the world that might lead to major wars. There are no other powers that are in prospect that would pose the kind of risk to Western security that the Soviet Union does. The Chinese were perceived to be more of a threat several years ago, but even when they were thought to be some kind of threat, no one thought of them as a primary threat, and it was not believed that they would be the primary threat for generations, probably. The possible threat from countries in the Middle East, whether Iran or the Arabic countries, is primarily an economic one in the near term, in that these countries control much of the world's supply of oil, and that can become an important security threat. Apart from that problem, because in part of the importance of oil, the Soviet Union is very active in becoming involved in the Middle East, and the Soviets might very well participate in some Middle Eastern crisis in some way that might very realistically lead to a war.
A combination of Islamic manpower with Russia's nuclear capacity. It could prove disastrous to the West, and as Dr. Brennan suggested, such a combination is quite possible. We know the Soviet Union has the 5th largest Muslim population in the world, yet another reason why the two countries could combine. Also, surprisingly, Nostradamus even indicates that there might be a change in southern Russia, involving a split and even a decline of communism.
The Moorish law will be seen to fail, followed by another that is more pleasing. Boris Danes will be the first to give way through gifts and tongues to another more appealing.
This reference to Moorish law is intriguing because some 10 years before Nostradamus first began his writings, Sir Thomas More published his famous Utopia, the great formula for the perfect but imaginary state. Obviously, Nostradamus would be familiar with the work, but what is intriguing is that he should predict that the Utopia, More's law, would become the basis for a new and revolutionary system of government in the 20th century, communism. And further than that, to suggest that it will ultimately weaken and fail.
Boris Danes will be the first to give way through gifts and tongues to another more appealing.
That could mean the end of communism. There is a reference to the river Borysthenes, which is the Dnieper in southern Russia. It says that Borysthenes will fail. That means Dnieper will fail first. Respectively, the southern Russia will fall first. Now, as we know, in southern Russia, there is a great influence of Islamic religion. And this may mean that to the people who live in southern Russia, the Islamic doctrine will prove more seductive than communism.
The old will hold strong, then removed from the scene. Then all things common among friends put far behind.
All things common among friends, the main theme of communism, so aptly described by Nostradamus, is to be put far behind. So, in answer to who, it's quite logical to suggest that the West and Christianity could be fighting a nuclear war against the Soviet Union and Islam, united as the Eastern power. And why do we imagine it will be a nuclear war?
Leave, go forth out of Geneva all. Saturn of gold shall be changed into iron. The contrary of the positive ray shall exterminate all.
The contrary of the positive, which shall exterminate all. This could only be a reference to the chain reaction involved in nuclear fission, in which the balance of positive and negative particles of the atom are bombarded by additional neutrons.
Uranium undergoes fission, which means the atoms divide into two, and in the process they give off neutrons, and these will cause other atoms to divide into two, and each time an atom divides into two fission products, as they are called, a lot of energy is released, and one can make the thing so that many atoms divide into two simultaneously to generate a great deal of energy suddenly.
From hidden fires a great place burns with heat. Little rain, a hot wind, wars and raids.
It increases the temperature of everything in that region, and of course they start to burn in the atmosphere. So it's the main devastation is as a result of widespread fires, all taking place simultaneously.
Before it happens, the heavens shall show signs. In the year that Saturn and Mars are equally fiery, the air is very dry, a long meteor.
Nostradamus clearly suggests here that there will be signs in the sky and warnings, a long meteor.
Of people and beasts shall be a horrible destruction. Blood, thirst, famine, when the comet shall run.
Well, Halley's Comet is the most spectacular of the comets. It's a very big comet, and it's due in 1986.
I bewail Nice, Monaco, Pisa, Genoa, Savona, Sienne, Capua, Modena, Malua. Upon them blood and sword for a New Year's gift. Fire, earthquake, water, unhappy ending.
These cities of southern Europe devastated around the new year. A definite warning for Europe. Not just confined to fire and water, but also earthquakes, a natural disaster, which Nostradamus often says will take place in our immediate future.
The earth shall so quake that it shall fall and ruin the great theatre. The earthquake shall be so great in the month of May, Saturn, Kuiper, Jupiter, Mercury and Taurus, Venus also, Cancer, Mars in zero. Then hail shall fall, bigger than an egg.
In that quatrain, 67 of the 10th century, he not only gives us the month of the great earthquake as being May, but also the means whereby the year can be calculated astrologically through the conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, Capricorn, Mercury. And such a configuration occurs in the year 1988. 1986, Halley's Comet. 1988, the Great Earthquake. And where will this great earthquake be centered? There are many major fault lines across the world, but one which has already devastated a city and which scientists agree will strike again soon is the San Andreas Fault, which runs along the west coast of the United States.
The crust of the Earth is broken up into plates, which are moving with respect to each other. Normally, it doesn't occur smoothly. Strain builds up like the energy you store in a rubber band when you stretch it, until the rubber band breaks, and the plates, or the rocks along the edge, snap back into line, and the vibrations that are caused by that sudden motion radiate out and are felt and recorded as an earthquake. And such a thing happens in a populated area. It's a great disaster. It's been determined that the recurrence rate between great earthquakes is about 160 years. The last one was in 1857, and that was 122 years ago. So we're getting up into the time period when we have to think about such an occurrence. The San Andreas Fault comes up from the Mexican border and goes up past San Francisco, very close to San Francisco, and on up to the north. There was one of about magnitude 8 in 1906 that destroyed San Francisco. Plates are still moving, and only a certain amount of strain can be held up there. It will happen again. Hopefully, the buildings that are built there now can stand up to it better than the buildings that were there in 1906.
Fire from the center of the earth shall make an earthquake of the new city.
Could it be that Nostradamus means the newly built city of San Francisco?
He is convinced that America will be shaken by an earthquake, and he even says it will go as far north as to shake New York. I don't think New York will fall down, but the effects will be so tremendous. And this earthquake he repeats again and again and again.
And further to that devastation, there is famine.
The great famine do I see drawing near, turning from one way to another, and then becoming universal. So great and long, that they shall come to pluck the root from the wood and the child from the breast.
A famine so bad that it leads to cannibalism.
The bushel of wheat shall rise so high that man shall be a man-eater.
Now we've taken examples of quatrains and explained them and analyzed them. Now, we ask you just to listen to what Nostradamus has to say about the devastation of a nuclear war, a third world war. His description is so vivid, it needs no interpretation.
The kingdom of Fez shall come to those of Europe. Fire and sword shall destroy their city. The great one of Asia by land and sea with a great army, so that blues, greens, crosses, to death he shall drive. Tears, cries and wailing, howls and terror, an inhuman cruel heart, black and cold. Lake Geneva, the islands, the main people of Genoa, blood pours, hunger for wheat, mercy to none. The Arab prince, Mars, Sol, Venus, Leo, the kingdoms of the church will be overcome by the sea. Towards Persia, very near 1 million. Turkey, Egypt, true serpent will invade. In the Danube and Rhine shall come to drink the great camel, and shall not repent. The Rhone shall tremble, and more those of Loire, and near the Alps the cock shall ruin him. From the Black Sea and the great Tartaria, a king shall come to see France. He shall go through Aramea and Armenia, and shall leave a bloody rod in Constantinople. At the 48th degree of the climacteric, the end of Cancer, there is a very great drought. Fish in the sea, river and the lake boiled hectic, Béarn and Bigorre in distress from fire in the sky. If France, you cross the Ligurian Sea, you will find yourself besieged among islands and sea. Mohammed against you, more so the Adriatic. You will gnaw the bones of horses and asses. The fleet is wrecked near the Adriatic Sea. The earth trembles, pushed into the air and falls again. Egypt trembles, Mahometan increase, and the herald is sent to call out for surrender.
So the devastation spreads across Europe, and even into Egypt and Constantinople. But it does not stop there. The United States is also involved, as we can see from a quatrain which many experts agree refers to New York as the new city.
Garden of the world near the new city, in the way of the man-made mountains, shall be seized on and plunged into a ferment, being forced to drink sulphurous, poisoned waters.
The man-made mountains, an obvious description of modern skyscrapers. Further to that is the reference to the fire in the 45th degree latitude, which is very close to the position of New York City.
The sky will burn at 45 degrees. Fire approaches the great new city. Immediately, a huge scattered flame leaps up.
In answer to the question where, it's likely that most of the world will be involved. Hopefully some a little less than those specifically described by Nostradamus. Which brings us to the question of who will survive. To answer this, we need to remember Hiroshima and try to comprehend the devastation of more than 20 years of nuclear holocaust. Obviously, many of us would have no chance whatsoever. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. Nostradamus does tell us the war will end, and that the West will ultimately win due to an unexpected alliance, an alliance between the USA and Russia. Now, this may seem far-fetched, but let's examine the evidence given by Nostradamus.
When those of the Arctic pole shall be united together, there shall be in the east great fear and trembling. One shall be newly elected that shall bear the brunt. Rhodes, Constantinople shall be dyed with barbarian blood.
Those of the Arctic pole can only mean Russia and the US. As we see here at the Bering Strait, the two continents are at their closest point in the Arctic Circle. Alaska, part of the US, and Russia. And he goes on to say, in the east, great fear and trembling. So he's suggesting here that these two northern powers will unite against the east. And there's a further quatrain to support this. One day the two great masters shall be friends. Their great powers shall be increased. So after many years of fighting, it seems that Russia herself may become uncertain, that there will be a division in the land. The south remaining with Islam due to the predominance of Muslim population, and the north joining with the US, those of the Arctic pole. And incredible as it may seem, Nostradamus suggests that this alliance will not only occur, but will triumph, as he says in several quatrains and also in one of his epistles.
For the principal eastern ruler, being for the most part moved by the northern and western men, shall be vanquished and put to death, beaten, and all the rest put to flight, and the children he had by many women put in prison. The barbarian league will be driven out. Of the two laws, the pagan one will fail.
Here he tells us the pagan law will be driven out, and goes on to talk of a king of Europe who eventually becomes a driving force for victory for the West.
As a griffin shall come the king of Europe, accompanied by those of the north. Of reds and whites shall conduct a great troop, and then shall go against the king of Babylon.
There it is again, another reference to those of the north. And the reds and the whites? Russians and the West.
By Antichrist 3 shall be brought to nothing. His war shall last 27 years. The heretics dead, prisoners exiled. Blood, human body, water made red, earth shrunk.
Here, Nostradamus states definitely that the war will last for 27 years, and that the third Antichrist will be driven back and brought to nothing.
From Barcelona, from Genoa and Venice, from Sicily near Monaco united, against the barbarian the fleet shall take her aim. The barbarian shall be driven back. After this war shall have lasted a good while, there shall be a renewed reign of Saturn and a golden age. God the Creator shall say, hearing the affliction of his people, Satan shall be put and tied in the bottom of the deep, and here shall begin an age of universal peace.
It seems our jigsaw puzzle is now complete. We are talking of a war that could begin in 1981, that definitely lasts for 27 years, that involves the East, and notably Islam, against the West and Christianity, ultimately in alliance with Russia. It spreads over most of the world, but specifically in Europe. After that, there will be peace, possibly for as long as 1,000 years. After that peace, we're not told much of what will happen, except that ultimately, and he actually gives the year, the world will end. The year 3797. Scare tactics, common sense, or amazing guesswork? Who knows? Nostradamus didn't tell us very much more. The climax of his predictions is also the climax of this program. We're at the crossroads. Our immediate future is the worst war man will ever know. And not just according to Nostradamus. Hearing his words simply reminds us that a third war is highly possible, considering the current unrest across our world. It's something we all hope will never happen. Perhaps if we heed Nostradamus, it may not be too late. The decision is not up to the next generation. It's up to us. Good night.
7 National News is next, followed by a premiere Jacques Cousteau special on the world around us. And tomorrow, Sharon takes the new Lamborghini Countach for a spin. And Chris looks at India's entrance into the space race on Beyond 2000, Sunday 7:30 on 7.